Welcome back. We are going to build our first app today, and I would like to focus it in on a quiz app for the most part. Thanks in advance for dealing with my sinuses. I have like really bad issues right now with my nose, but we're going to get through this tutorial today, and I would like to really go in depth with you. I'm going to be going pretty fast, so I would encourage that you actually go down to the gear in the lower right hand corner, and you could slow this down if you like. That way you can really absorb all the information that I'm going over with you today. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So the scenario is, with all the skills that you've learned so far, plus some new ones you're about to get in this video, we want to use all of your foundational skills with Swift and apply them to your first app. So let's say I need a quiz app, and this quiz app is going to have, obviously questions, and each question will be true or false. And I want only about 5 questions. And once it's done asking you all 5 of those questions, I want the quiz to actually start over. So with what we know now so far with the previous tutorial videos, if you've been watching, is you have all this information about ModelViewController. Let's actually go to that first. So I know I've been bashing this through, but we have ModelViewController, and we have our view. Let's first talk about how our view is going to look. Our view is going to look something like this, where you are going to have maybe 2 buttons. One's going to be true, one is going to be false. And then up top, you'll actually have the question. And then maybe there will be a round number and a scorekeeper at the bottom. So this is actually our view so far. Easy enough, right? Now we have to create our view controller. Our view controller is going to need to be hooked up to our view. So what's the first thing we need to do? We need to obviously create a class of view controller, and we would do that with the keywords class. Just like in the previous video where I gave you a tour, I briefly mentioned this. We make a class called quiz view controller. I'll put VC for short, and it needs to inherit from, do you remember? UI view controller. UI view controller. Inside the brackets of our class, we have a few things that we would like to put. First things first, we need to make sure that there is a method that comes with our class called viewDidLoad. ViewDidLoad. This is a method that we get from Apple's class UIViewController. Now, whenever you're creating a class, it can either inherit from something, or it can just be a pure class of your own. In this case, this will be the only class that we will have something inherit from something else. UIViewController is a class that Apple made in order to manage a view, obviously hence the name ViewController. And viewDidLoad is a method that is inside of that class, UIViewController. And what viewDidLoad does is it allows you to put some code in for the time where the view did load. So after the view has loaded in your app, like literally the page is up, at that point, a split second, all this code that you write inside of here will happen. So that means that you have access to this area, to this method, inside of this viewDidLoad method, you can write things that you want to happen. Okay, so make more sense once you see it visually in code. And then also we have the question here. We want to tie that, we want to link that into our class here. So we would control click over inside the class, and then we'll have our question, and then we'll control click over for true and false, and these will be functions of their own. And we make functions with keyword func, and we'll have one for true and one for false. Cool. So this is the part where things get really interesting. If it wasn't already, you have your model objects and model data. So you have what's a model that we would actually create in this scenario? If you have been paying attention in the previous videos, you know that we have classes and we have structs, and structs are a structure that we can use over and over again for certain things. A class is an object that we want to create and use, and it's going to be unique, and it's never really going to change necessarily. Its entire being will never change, and you don't copy it, you can only pass it as a reference. So when you're passing it around. So I'm going to go ahead and make a decision for us, and we're going to decide to use classes to create a model object for our quiz itself, or our question. So we're going to create a class called question. So this will be its own page here, and it'll be a class. It'll be called question. And then it'll contain some things in here, and we're going to run through that. So this is how we are starting to plan our project. Actually, this was the process. We planned our project. This is for the most part, this is where it is. Now we made a couple of rules here that there were only going to be 5 questions. So we want to make sure to store those questions somewhere. A lot of times you don't necessarily want all of that information to be in the view controller. Yes, we have plenty of lines of code. You can have as many lines of code as you want inside of your view controller, but it keeps your code nice and neat if you're able to keep it designated in a different location. So we would end up making another file that would actually contain our questions. So we'd have question 1, question 2, and so on and so forth inside of this separate file here that we can call whatever. Now in the future, we'll review how you would get this data from like a server, because most companies, if you're going to go work for a company or do a project for a company, they're going to want you to be able to grab that data from their server and pull it into your app. You won't necessarily have a page of that handwritten data, but for the sake of you learning how this process works, in this video we are going to handwrite our data. It will be made manually. Now there's a couple of things in here that we haven't decided on yet, like where are we going to put the counter, for example, for how many questions have been asked, or maybe a counter that marks how many points you've scored, how many questions you got correct. That will most likely live inside of the view controller. Now we can go ahead and get to it. Let's actually build this. So the next thing you want to do is actually go into Xcode. So we'd open up Xcode here. And just like our tour that we went over, the Xcode kind of interface, I'm going to do the same thing where I would go to File in the upper left-hand corner, go to New, and then Project. At this point, I can go ahead and decide what kind of device I would like this to be on. Move this around a little bit. Typically, you would choose a single view application. These are all the different topics that we can choose from, the types of apps that we might want to create. This gives us a nice template to start with some code to start with as well. But we're going to start with a single view application once again. We are going to name our application. The name of our application is going to be Quiz App. Team could be something else here. You can put your company here. And the unit testing, we're going to uncheck those for now. We don't need them. And Git repository, we will once again go over that later. We're going to skip over that for now. We're going to hit create. Now we're inside of our project. And the first thing that I like to do whenever I have a new project is I like to organize my code. So we mentioned that we're going off of a design pattern called MVC, ModelViewController. So I actually like to literally organize my files in correspond with ModelViewController. So what I'll do here is up top you have this very first file in the upper left hand corner in your file hierarchy. This first one gives you access to some general information about your project. Deployment target down here is the version of the operating system that you're working with. So for example, iOS 11, iOS 10, this means that this is the target level device that you're going after, the software. The devices could be universal. For today, we're just going to go over iPhone. We're going to go over constraints in the future. I know that a lot of programmers out there like to do things programmatically. We may cover things programmatically, but for the sake of speed, we will actually do everything manually in the storyboard. So the second file here is actually a folder, your project folder. And I'm going to right click or two finger click on this if you have a trackpad. And I'm going to create a new group, which is basically a new folder. And this folder is going to be called View. I'm going to make another one, two finger click, new group. This is going to be ViewController. And one more, this is going to be called Model. So I'm just going to rearrange some things. You know that from the previous video, the app delegate file is helping us decide what happens at app launch, as well as some other things that it's actually listening for. We don't really touch that, at least not right now. We have a view controller already. We don't necessarily need this. We're not going to actually use it. I'm going to have us create our own. So you can actually select view controller one time and hit delete and move it to trash. And we do have a storyboard. We have main.storyboard. And this is actually where we're visually going to work on the view. So I'm going to drag main.storyboard inside of the view folder that I have here. I'm going to put that at the top, just like that. Next, we have a model folder. Now, our model folder we had agreed upon is going to be a class that will be a question. It'll represent a question. It'll model a question. So two finger click on that and do new file. And we can do a new Swift file. We can just double click on that. There are some other options in here for different types of files that we can have, but we are just going to use a Swift file. So we're going to name this file question. All right. I'm going to close up some of these bars to give us some room. You can toggle the sidebars by clicking in the upper right hand corner. We have the right inspector here, as well as the left inspector showing the hierarchy. But I'm going to give you your first tip in terms of commands. Commands are great. You can do Command 0 to close out the file hierarchy, and you can do Command Option 0 in order to close out the inspector on the right hand side. So let's make our class. Our class will start with a keyword class, and then we will actually name our class question. Open up the brackets, and inside here we are actually going to add a couple properties. So we will have what is our question going to have? It will have a question. So our first property will be question, and it'll be of type string, and it will equal. Actually, we'll leave it empty for now. And our second property will be answer. And this will be of type Boolean, because it'll be a true or false answer. Now with classes, in a struct, you don't have to do anything. We would be done here with creating that structure. We don't have to do anything else. For a class, we have to have an initializer method. It is a method that's called once we are creating a instance of that class. We're creating a question. At the time that we're compiling a question, we have to run this method, and we have to have this method in order for this class to exist. So we start with the keyword init. We could hit return and let Apple finish it, but I'm just going to do this here. And inside of the parentheses here, we are going to put question, which is going to be of type string, comma, answer. Don't worry, I'm going to explain this right now. And so once again, I know I had shared this with you in the structs versus classes video, but the init method has parameters. Well, you want to put parameters in there because at the time that you're creating a question, for example, the goal of this init method is to populate the properties inside of this class. We want to set a value for these two properties that we have up here, question and answer. So in order to do that, we would do self. And remember, self is the keyword for calling upon whatever thing you're in at the time. So we're in a class right now called question. So self is actually question, referring to question. Dot, and as you can see, it's giving us access to the question property up here. So we're saying, hey, myself, my question is going to be equal to whatever parameter comes through. This guy right here, whatever is entered in the parameter when creating a question is going to come through here. So question self dot answer equals answer, which is this answer right here. So we will come back to this. We're going to see this in action. Actually, right off the bat, let me just show you a quick example. Let's say let test question. We're going to make a property here called question, our test question, and it is going to be of our class question. Now, right now it's giving us an error because question by itself is nothing. Like it's not. It needs to be initialized, and that's what that method is for. And when you open up the parentheses, it gives us that init method. It just doesn't say init at the beginning. Like you see up here, we have init question answer. When we open up the parentheses here, it's asking, hey, I need these two parameters in order to create an instance of this class. Now we could have an empty instance of this class. I don't think that will work because we didn't give a default value for these properties up here. So it is going to force us to do something. So we can hit return, and we can put some parameters in here. Like for question, I can say, is this a question? An answer, false. No, I could do true. Okay, and then I can say test question dot question, just to double check. And that would be, oh, but it's not, we're not doing anything with it. So unlike playgrounds where you can actually test things out and see what it is, here in the compiler, it'll complain with you if you're not doing anything with it, which we're going to be doing something with our questions after setting them. We're going to be displaying them inside of the view so the user can see. Anyway, I just did all of that so that you could see the initializer method in action right away, so you have direct context to what this init method is for. Anytime we're creating an instance of a question, it requires us to call that init method if we have one. Well, the init method is there to help us out. Not all classes are going to abide by this rule. You're going to find some different ways around that. But for the most part, you will want some kind of init method to be able to help you set the properties, set the values of that class whenever you're creating a instance of that class. So I'm going to get rid of this. We now have our model object. Yay! Awesome. So now we can actually go on to the next thing. I'm going to do Command 1 in order to open up the file hierarchy again and close model, because I don't need to see question anymore. But I do need a view controller. But first, I think let's go over to the view. Let's start putting some things together.